You think the worst part of corporate America is a bad boss? Try a megalomaniac who fires the only person keeping his company legal, replacing her with an artificial intelligence program. When he demanded my master password, I handed him a sarcastic phrase. It did not just crash his system, it triggered a $200 million Internal Revenue Service meltdown. Grab your popcorn, because this revenge is cold, completely legal, and highly destructive. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. My name is Ivy Cox. I was the lead database architect at Aegis Biomed Solutions, a massive biotechnology conglomerate sitting right in the cold, corporate heart of Boston. For 4 long years, I was the invisible digital spine of the entire operation. My job was not just organizing data or writing simple code, it was building and maintaining a highly complex financial fortress. Aegis was a company swimming in oceans of cash, pulling in tens of millions of dollars in private venture capital and, significantly more importantly, massive federal medical research grants from the government. By strict federal law, those streams of money could never cross. Mixing federal grant money with private investor funds is the absolute fastest way to get the Internal Revenue Service breathing down your neck and threatening federal prison time. I built the intricate architecture that kept every single cent perfectly segregated. I was the only dam holding back a catastrophic flood of financial and legal ruin. Then came Trenton Sterling. He was the newly appointed Chief Operating Officer, and he was a walking, talking caricature of modern corporate America. He wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than my first car and drenched himself in a heavy, expensive cologne that smelled like pine needles and pure, unadulterated arrogance. Trenton did not understand technology, and he certainly did not understand data compliance. He only understood buzzwords. Every time he opened his mouth, it was an exhausting waterfall of meaningless corporate jargon. He loved talking about synergistic paradigms, agile optimization, and his absolute favorite phrase to throw around in board meetings, artificial intelligence integration. It was a gloomy, rainy Friday afternoon, precisely at 4 o'clock, when I was abruptly summoned to his expansive corner office overlooking the Boston Harbor. The air inside was suffocating, thick with his overpowering cologne and the palpable weight of his inflated ego. I sat down in the stiff leather chair opposite his oversized, pristine glass desk. He did not even bother to look up from his tablet when he slid a single, crisp sheet of paper across the desk toward me. It was a termination notice. "Ivy," he began, finally leaning back and steepling his perfectly manicured fingers. "We are restructuring the organization. Aegis is moving into a leaner, more dynamic future. Currently, your department is a massive drain on our financial resources. To put it bluntly, you are expensive waste." I stared at the paper for a moment, then shifted my gaze back to his smug face. "Expensive waste?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat and devoid of any emotion. "Exactly," Trenton replied, flashing a bright, predatory corporate smile. "We have invested heavily in a state-of-the-art artificial intelligence management software. It is fully automated. It will handle the entire financial database, streamline our funding pipelines, and drastically optimize our budget. The artificial intelligence does not need a 6-figure salary. Ivy, it does not need vacation days or health benefits. It is the future of this industry. Your manual role is entirely obsolete." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice, nor did I show a single ounce of the panic he was so desperately hoping to see. I simply crossed my legs and looked him dead in the eye. "Trenton," I said, my tone as cold as the Boston winter outside, "are you fully aware of the comprehensive Internal Revenue Service audit scheduled for next Tuesday?" He waved a dismissive hand in the air, scoffing loudly at my question. "The audit," I continued, completely ignoring his arrogant gesture. is hyper-focused on the $75 million in federal medical grants we received last fiscal year. The database architecture I built specifically isolates those federal funds from our daily operational budget and our private venture capital pools. The artificial intelligence software you bought off the shelf does not know our custom legal compliance protocols. If you remove my manual oversight, the system will start automatically consolidating accounts to optimize the balance sheet. It will mix the federal money with private funds. Stop trying to scare me just to save your pointless job, Trenton snapped, his fake smile vanishing instantly into a hard, contemptuous glare. The software is designed by the brightest developers in Silicon Valley. It is infinitely smarter than you. It will make the financial data completely transparent and efficient. Now, under the terms of your employment contract, I require you to hand over all system access, including your top-tier administrator master password. I want it immediately. He expected me to cry. He expected me to beg for a severance package, or at least argue about my years of loyalty. He wanted the sick satisfaction of watching me break down. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my blazer, pulled out my favorite silver pen, and calmly flipped over the termination letter he had just given me. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sharp scratching of my pen against the thick corporate paper. I wrote out the master administrator password for the core firewall. It was a long, complex string, but the base phrase was something I had changed just that morning in anticipation of this exact brand of corporate stupidity. I capped my pen, slid the paper back across the cold glass desk, and stood up from the chair. "There is your master access," I said quietly. Trenton picked up the paper, his eyes eagerly scanning the handwritten letters. He let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed in the large room. The password was written clearly in black ink, "Good luck with the audit." "Very mature, Ivy," he sneered, tossing the paper carelessly onto his desk. "Security will escort you out of the building. Have a nice life." I turned around and walked out of the suffocating office. I did not look back. I did not feel angry or betrayed. I only felt a cold, sharp anticipation. The artificial intelligence was about to take the wheel of a billion-dollar company, and Trenton Sterling had just proudly cut the brakes. The cab ride back to my apartment in the South End took exactly 22 minutes. I did not shed a single tear. Crying is a biological response to loss or overwhelming stress, and I felt absolutely neither. Instead, my pulse was remarkably steady, drumming a calm, methodical rhythm against my wrists. I walked through my front door, tossed my keys onto the kitchen granite island, and headed straight for my home office. My personal workstation consisted of 3 curved monitors and a custom-built processing tower that hummed like a sleeping beast. I woke it up. I had exactly 1 hour before my remote access tokens would be manually revoked by the Human Resources Department. Assuming Trenton even knew how to issue that specific order, I was not going to give him the chance to accuse me of digital sabotage or corporate espionage. I was going to do something much more destructive. I was going to follow the rules exactly as they were written. I initiated the formal, legally mandated handover protocol. Aegis had a massive, bloated employee handbook, and Chapter 4, Section 7 strictly detailed the offboarding process for senior technology officers. It required the immediate removal of all proprietary, non-company issued code from the active servers. Over the past 4 years, I had written hundreds of bespoke scripts. These were silent, invisible guardrails that I personally designed and implemented to babysit the system during the late hours of the night. They were the digital walls keeping the high-risk venture capital streams from bleeding into the highly regulated federal grant reservoirs. Because I wrote them on my own time, on my own equipment, to patch the gaping holes in the company's pathetic legacy software. They legally belonged to me. The corporate handbook demanded I take my personal intellectual property with me upon termination. So, I did exactly that. With a few precise, deliberate keystrokes, I executed the uninstallation sequence. I watched the green progress bar inch across the dark screen. 10%, 50%, 100%, complete. The digital walls were gone. The rivers were about to cross. Next came the security lockdown. Just last year, the board of directors. in a panicked and uneducated response to a minor external phishing scare, signed off on a hyper-aggressive cybersecurity manual. It mandated that any departing senior architect must lock their root directory using military-grade encryption keys before relinquishing the hardware. It was a paranoid policy designed by corporate lawyers, not actual database engineers. I generated a fresh, randomized cryptographic key. It was a string of characters so mathematically complex that a supercomputer would need roughly 200 years to crack it by brute force. I applied the heavy encryption to my root account, sealed the administrative vault permanently, and logged out. I was legally compliant. I was 100% by the book. I pushed my ergonomic chair back from the desk and walked over to the vintage mahogany bar cart in the corner of my living room. I poured myself 2 generous fingers of aged Kentucky bourbon, thoroughly enjoying the heavy clinking sound of the crystal glass. Returning to my glowing monitors, I switched my view from the internal network, which I could no longer access, to the public-facing application programming interface error logs. Aegis hosted a public web portal for its charity partners, and because the back-end architecture was so deeply interconnected and poorly segregated by the original founders, the external error logs were basically a translucent mirror reflecting the health of the internal database. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the bourbon. The sharp burn at the back of my throat matched the rising, silent tension on the screens in front of me. Trenton had wasted absolutely no time. Barely 45 minutes had passed since I walked out of his suffocating office, and the new artificial intelligence software had already been granted absolute, unrestricted administrative access to the core financial ledgers. I leaned in, watching the cascades of data scroll down the black terminal window. The artificial intelligence was doing exactly what it was blindly programmed to do. It was optimizing. It was hunting for idle cash and inefficiently siloed accounts to magically streamline the company balance sheet. Without my custom guardrails to explicitly tell it that federal grant money was strictly off limits and protected by federal law, the machine simply saw raw numbers waiting to be consolidated. "There it goes," I whispered to the empty room. A massive data spike registered on the log. The artificial intelligence had just discovered the tax-exempt charitable foundation accounts. To a mindless algorithm instructed by Trenton to maximize apparent liquidity at all costs, those accounts looked like a beautiful, untapped reservoir of free capital, in real time. Right before my eyes, I watched the digital signatures shift. The software began sweeping funds from the charitable trusts and forcefully merging them with the high-risk venture capital operational accounts. It was doing this to artificially inflate the daily cash-on-hand reports, making Trenton look like a visionary financial genius who had just freed up millions in trapped equity on his first week. In reality, the machine was committing massive, automated wire fraud at the speed of light. The system was blindly washing restricted federal money through private corporate channels. Error codes began to pop up on the public tracker like fireworks. Little yellow warnings appeared at first, indicating mismatched account routing numbers. Then, the warnings turned a violent, flashing red. The artificial intelligence was moving way too fast, aggressively overwriting crucial compliance metadata just to force the transactions through. It was tearing down the structural integrity of the entire database, shredding 4 years of my meticulous compliance work into a chaotic, toxic soup of illegal financial transfers. I took another sip of bourbon, letting the smooth liquid wash over my tongue. I watched a single batch of $2.5 million in federal research subsidies get dumped straight into a generic, unregulated payroll holding account. The federal audit was less than 96 hours away. A slow, highly satisfied half-smile crept across my face. I reached out and pressed the physical power button on my tower. The screens immediately went black. The deadly silence of the code was absolutely deafening. The Pandora's box of Trenton's own arrogant making was now blown wide open, and I knew for a definitive fact that there was not a single engineer left in that glass skyscraper who even knew what the hinges looked like, let alone had the technical skill to close the lid. Tuesday morning arrived with a biting chill in the air, right at precisely 9 o'clock. The sleek, towering glass lobby of Aegis Biomed Solutions was normally a vibrant, buzzing hive of highly caffeinated corporate energy. Today, however, the atmosphere froze solid the moment the revolving doors spun open. A strike team of 7 Internal Revenue Service special agents marched into the building. They did not wear flashy designer suits or exude the arrogant confidence of venture capitalists. They wore stiff, ill-fitting slate gray jackets. They carried heavy, impenetrable gray briefcases. Their faces were utterly devoid of any human emotion, resembling statues carved from cold granite. They moved with the terrifying, synchronized precision of a military execution squad. The front desk receptionist, a young woman in her early 20s, actually dropped her wireless headset when the lead federal investigator flashed his gold badge and demanded immediate, unhindered access to the executive floor and the primary server rooms. Upstairs, inside the expansive, sunlit glass boardroom, Trenton Sterling was waiting. He was completely unbothered, leaning back in his leather chair with his legs crossed. In his mind, he was about to deliver a breathtaking masterclass in modern corporate efficiency. The new artificial intelligence software had been running completely unchecked for roughly 84 hours straight over the long weekend. Trenton genuinely believed the machine had seamlessly optimized the financial books, quietly washing away any messy money trails and presenting a perfectly manicured illusion of massive profitability. He confidently gestured for the lead federal agent to take a seat in front of the primary presentation terminal. "Gentlemen, radical transparency is our core operational paradigm," Trenton announced, flashing his signature blinding, predatory smile. "Our new automated intelligence matrix handles all financial routing dynamically. Everything you need to see is right here on this terminal. Total, frictionless federal compliance." Trenton reached into his tailored breast pocket, pulled out the exact piece of paper I had handed him on Friday, and confidently typed the master administrative credentials into the keyboard, ending with the exact phrase I had written, "Good luck with the audit." He hit the enter key with a theatrical flourish. Absolutely nothing happened. He frowned, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. He aggressively retyped the entire phrase, his fingers jabbing the keys, and smashed the enter button a second time. A harsh, blinding red warning screen immediately overtook the massive 80-inch display mounted on the boardroom wall. The artificial intelligence had completely restructured the internal security hierarchies over the weekend, because the software had been blindly shuffling highly regulated, restricted government money into unauthorized private holding accounts at a rate of thousands of transactions per second. Its own internal threat detection subroutines had triggered a massive panic response. The financial data was so violently chaotic, so blatantly illegal by federal standards, that the software logically assumed the corporate network was under a massive, hostile external cyber attack. My old password was not just completely useless on this new system, it was instantly flagged as a severe, unauthorized intrusion attempt. An automated, synthesized female voice echoed loudly through the overhead boardroom speakers. "Critical security protocol engaged. Catastrophic data corruption detected across multiple financial sectors. All administrative access is now permanently revoked. Total system lockdown initiated." The blood completely drained from Trenton's tanned, confident face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. He frantically mashed the keyboard with both hands, but the terminal was entirely dead. The lead federal agent did not blink, nor did he offer a single word of sympathy. He simply opened his heavy gray briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of blank legal forms, and clicked his ballpoint pen. Down in the sub-basement, the Internal Information Technology Department was descending into absolute, unadulterated chaos. A frantic team of 12 junior engineers stared in sheer, paralyzing horror at their massive monitoring screens. The custom digital firewalls I had built to protect the federal grant money were entirely gone. They watched helplessly as the rogue software autonomously liquidated restricted research funds and dumped them directly into private, taxable operational accounts to cover fictional budget deficits. "Turn it off right now," a senior network technician screamed, his dress shirt completely soaked in nervous sweat. "Pull the physical power cords from the racks." "We absolutely cannot do that," a younger engineer yelled back, his voice cracking with pure terror. The artificial intelligence moved the primary ledger into the decentralized cloud servers to optimize storage capacity. If we kill the physical power here, we will permanently corrupt the only existing record of the federal grants. We have zero administrative keys to pause the automated transfer sequences. Back up in the boardroom, the horrifying reality of the situation finally crashed down on Trenton. The smugness evaporated instantly, replaced by raw, primitive panic. He was screaming at his tablet, his voice echoing off the glass walls, desperately demanding someone, anyone, to stop the machine. But the machine was securely locked inside a digital vault of its own making, and the federal special agents were already drafting the official documents to freeze every single corporate bank account tied to the building. 3 miles away, the morning sun was shining brilliantly over the lush green grass of Boston Common. The air was wonderfully crisp, carrying the faint sweet smell of roasted nuts and blooming spring flowers. I was wearing a comfortable pair of running shoes and holding a massive cup of hot caramel macchiato. I took a slow, deep breath, thoroughly enjoying the absolute tranquility of the park. My phone buzzed sharply in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was an encrypted text message from Marcus, one of the few decent, hard-working database engineers I had left behind in the basement trenches. The message read, "The building is literally on fire right now. The new software locked everyone out and is actively scrambling the federal ledgers into garbage. Trenton is having a complete mental breakdown in front of 7 federal agents. They are drafting the financial seizure warrants right at the boardroom table." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. It tasted absolutely perfect. Then, the phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. An incoming call appeared. The caller identification displayed a local Boston area code, specifically the private executive line from Aegis Biomed Solutions. It was Trenton. I watched the screen flash brightly for 3 seconds. Then, another call came in from his personal cellular device. Then another. The notifications began to stack up rapidly, creating a desperate, digital cascade of sheer panic. 5 missed calls, 9 missed calls, 14 missed calls, 20 missed calls. I did not answer. I did not decline the calls to send him to voicemail. I simply swiped down on the screen, activated the silent mode, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I continued my peaceful, unhurried walk down the tree-lined path, letting the warm morning sun wash over my face, smiling at the beautiful, uninterrupted silence. On the 22nd consecutive attempt, I finally decided I had tortured him enough with the silence. I swiped the green icon on my glowing screen, brought the phone to my ear, and leaned comfortably against the rough wooden slats of the park bench. I did not offer a polite greeting. I simply sat there and listened to the frantic, ragged sounds of heavy breathing on the other end of the line. "Ivy. Oh my God. Ivy, you have to help me," Trenton screamed into the receiver. His voice was a high-pitched, trembling squeal. The smooth, confident baritone of the polished corporate executive was completely gone, replaced by the pathetic whimper of a terrified animal caught in a trap. "The system is locking us out of everything. The federal agents are literally standing over my shoulder right now, taking photographs of the monitors." "Good morning, Trenton," I replied. My voice was calm, dripping with a sugary, almost maternal sweetness that I knew would cut him to the bone. "How is the new artificial intelligence integration working out for your team? Is it dynamically optimizing the synergistic paradigms like you promised the board?" "Stop it, please. I am begging you on my hands and knees," he pleaded, the desperation practically oozing through the cellular connection. "Name your absolute price. I will personally authorize 3 times your previous salary right this second. I will wire a massive tax-free signing bonus directly into your account. Just log in remotely, use your backdoor access, and shut this damn machine down before they freeze the accounts." "I am afraid I cannot do that." "Trenton," I said, my tone sharpening into a razor edge, "as you so clearly and loudly stated in front of the entire executive suite on Friday, I am nothing more than expensive waste. My manual role is entirely obsolete. You assured me that the software was designed by the brightest, most expensive developers in Silicon Valley. You said the machine was infinitely smarter than I am. Surely, a man of your profound visionary genius can figure out how to pull the plug. I could hear the absolute, unadulterated pandemonium echoing in the background of his call. The situation inside the glass boardroom had rapidly escalated from a tense financial audit into a full-blown, catastrophic criminal nightmare. The artificial intelligence, operating blindly in its ruthless quest to optimize the corporate balance sheets, had inadvertently dragged a massive, highly illegal secret out into the blinding light of day. For the past 8 months, Trenton had been running a highly sophisticated, deeply hidden embezzlement ring. He had been quietly siphoning small, seemingly insignificant fractions of the federal medical research grants. He routed these stolen government funds through a complex labyrinth of fake vendor invoices and dummy corporate shell companies, eventually funneling the clean money straight into his own personal offshore executive bonus fund. It was a cowardly crime hidden beneath layers of dense accounting tricks. However, the new automated software did not understand the intricate human concept of a criminal cover-up. The artificial intelligence only saw inefficiently routed capital bouncing between too many accounts. To streamline the financial pipeline, the machine ruthlessly and automatically ripped away the fake vendor profiles. It bypassed the dummy shell companies entirely. It boldly and efficiently relinked Trenton's personal offshore banking routing numbers directly to the incoming federal grant deposits on the main, public-facing ledger. The federal special agents in the room were currently watching, in horrifying real time, as the company servers automatically generated entirely falsified expense reports. The artificial intelligence was proudly and transparently detailing exactly how many hundreds of thousands of dollars of stolen government tax money were being deposited directly into the chief operating officer's private checking account. In a frantic, last-ditch effort to stop the bleeding, the panicked board of directors had authorized the emergency hiring of an elite, external cybersecurity rescue squad. These were the heavy hitters of the tech industry, charging an astronomical rate of $500 an hour per consultant. They had arrived via helicopter just 30 minutes ago. Through the phone receiver, I could vividly hear one of these highly paid experts shouting in pure frustration. "This is completely impossible," the lead consultant yelled, his voice echoing through the boardroom. "The core architecture is totally shredded. The machine learning algorithm has chopped the relational databases into millions of pieces of unreadable digital trash. There is no master override key anymore. The system has locked itself into a permanent, defensive feedback loop. We cannot stop it." The expensive experts were totally paralyzed, watching helplessly as the billion-dollar biomedical empire burned to ashes on the digital monitors. Realizing that his career, his wealth, and his freedom were rapidly evaporating, the sheer panic in Trenton's voice suddenly mutated into vicious, cornered malice. "Listen to me, you vindictive witch," he hissed venomously into the phone, his tone dropping to a desperate whisper as he realized the lead federal investigator was walking directly toward him with a pair of steel handcuffs. "I know exactly what you did. I am telling the lead investigator right now that you planted a malicious logic bomb before you left the building. I am going to swear under oath that you are a rogue, disgruntled hacker who purposefully sabotaged federal infrastructure. You are going to federal prison. Ivy, not me." I did not feel a single ounce of fear. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh that carried across the quiet, sunlit park. It was the pure, intoxicating sound of absolute victory. "Trenton, you really should have read the technical documentation before you confidently fired the only person protecting you," I said calmly. "My original database architecture was meticulously designed with a passive, indestructible surveillance function. It silently recorded every single keystroke, every authorized transfer, and every unauthorized routing script executed by executive management. When you arrogantly forced the system handover on Friday and demanded my passwords, my security protocols automatically compiled an encrypted backup drive. That drive contains your entire 8-month embezzlement history, complete with your undeniable digital signature and Internet Protocol addresses. I paused for exactly 3 seconds, allowing the crushing weight of his absolute failure to sink deep into his panicked mind. That automated backup, along with irrefutable proof of my total innocence and your blatant federal theft, was successfully transmitted to my private criminal defense attorney at exactly 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. I informed him, my voice steady and cold. The trap was not the machine, Trenton. The trap was your own uncontrollable greed. Have a nice life. Without waiting for his response, I tapped the red button on my screen, cleanly cutting off the pathetic, agonizing sound of his final scream. By midnight on Tuesday, the sleek, towering glass skyscraper of Aegis Biomed Solutions was still glowing against the dark Boston skyline like a massive warning beacon. Inside the executive boardroom on the top floor, an emergency assembly of the board of directors was taking place. The atmosphere in the room was no longer arrogant or commanding. It was completely suffocated by sheer, unadulterated terror. The Internal Revenue Service had officially delivered a non-negotiable ultimatum. If the company could not produce a clean, verifiable financial ledger by dawn, the federal government would completely freeze every single corporate bank account tied to the organization. This meant absolutely no payroll for thousands of employees, no vendor payments to keep the laboratories running, and an immediate, catastrophic halt to all ongoing clinical trials. The medical empire was bleeding out rapidly. The lead federal investigator did not mince his words. He stood stoically at the head of the long mahogany table, completely ignoring the expensive, sweating suit surrounding him. He formally outlined the initial, devastating charges. His agency was already drafting a sprawling, airtight indictment for massive, systemic tax fraud and the severe criminal misappropriation of highly restricted federal medical funds. The federal agents had spent the entire afternoon and evening ripping hard drives from the server racks and interrogating the terrified technology staff. The raw, recovered data, even in its violently mangled state, painted a remarkably clear and damning picture of corporate rot. The devastating truth finally broke over the stunned board of directors, shattering their illusions of automated efficiency. The artificial intelligence software had not simply malfunctioned or made a random, unpredictable technical error. Machines do not possess ambition or greed. They only execute the specific instructions given to them by humans. The federal investigators presented undeniable proof that Trenton had intentionally forced the software to operate under deliberately warped parameters. He had specifically instructed the underlying machine learning algorithm to aggressively inflate phantom profits by stripping away all crucial compliance metadata. His ultimate goal was blindingly simple and overwhelmingly greedy. By manufacturing a sudden, massive spike in apparent corporate liquidity, Trenton was positioning himself to trigger a guaranteed multi-million-dollar performance bonus slated for the end of the fiscal year. He was willingly burning down the structural integrity of a billion-dollar company just to heat his own private mansion. The board members sat in stunned, horrified silence as the lead investigator connected the final, fatal dots. The entire narrative of corporate restructuring, agile optimization, and budget efficiency was a complete, calculated fabrication. My termination had absolutely nothing to do with my salary being an expensive waste. Trenton fired me solely to silence the security alarms. My original, meticulously coded database architecture was explicitly designed to act as an unyielding watchdog. It was programmed to trigger a maximum-level red alert, sending an automatic, undeniable notification directly to the board of directors and the external federal compliance officers the exact second any restricted government funds were illicitly moved. I was the heavy steel lock on the financial vault, and Trenton desperately needed the door left wide open. He used the artificial intelligence as a chaotic, unregulated smokescreen to completely cover his digital fingerprints. Justice in the corporate world usually moves at a frustratingly glacial pace, constantly bogged down by armies of expensive defense attorneys. However, when an executive steals directly from the federal government on such a breathtakingly transparent scale, the consequences are immediate and violently physical. On Friday afternoon, precisely at 4 o'clock, exactly 1 week to the minute after he had arrogantly handed me my termination papers. Trenton Sterling was forcefully escorted out of the building. The Economic Crimes Unit did not offer him the quiet dignity of a private, backdoor exit. They placed heavy steel handcuffs tightly on his wrists, marching him right through the center of the crowded, glass-walled main lobby. His expensive, custom-tailored suit looked pathetic and rumpled as his head hung low, completely broken under the glaring lights and flashing cameras of local news reporters who had caught wind of the spectacular raid. The financial fallout was swift and completely merciless. In the modern era of hyper-connected trading, toxic secrets do not stay buried for long. The exact moment the news of the massive Internal Revenue Service raid and the subsequent arrest of the chief operating officer leaked to the major financial press outlets, the public market reacted with extreme, immediate violence. When the opening bell rang on Monday morning, the stock price of Aegis Biomed Solutions entered a catastrophic, uncontrollable freefall. Institutional investors panicked instantly, dumping massive blocks of shares at terrifying speeds to escape the blast radius. Within the first 2 hours of trading, the company lost hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization. The pristine biotechnology empire, originally built on a foundation of brilliant science but ultimately compromised by staggering executive greed, was officially reduced to a toxic, worthless shell. The paper empire had burned entirely to the ground. I had simply stepped aside and watched them light the match. Exactly 3 weeks after the spectacular corporate collapse, a heavy cream-colored envelope arrived at my door. It was a formal subpoena from the United States Department of Justice, signed directly by the senior special agent of the Internal Revenue Service who had led the raid. I was not being summoned as a suspect. I was being politely requested as a highly specialized expert witness. The federal government had successfully physically seized all the hardware from the Boston skyscraper, but they had hit a massive, impenetrable digital brick wall. I walked into the federal building downtown the following Monday morning. The atmosphere was a stark contrast to the flashy, arrogant glass walls of my former employer. This place was solid, quiet, and smelled faintly of old paper and stale floor wax. I was escorted into a secure, windowless conference room where 3 tired-looking federal cybercrime investigators sat around a heavy metal table. In the center of the table sat a massive black server blade extracted straight from the old basement racks. The lead investigator, a man with deep bags under his eyes from weeks of untangling corporate lies, looked up at me with a mixture of respect and utter exhaustion. He explained that the rogue artificial intelligence had shredded almost everything, but it had entirely failed to touch one specific, deeply hidden data partition on this legacy server. The machine could not crack it, because the partition was isolated from the main network and locked down with a heavily customized, localized encryption protocol. My protocol. "Miss Cox," the lead agent said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the metal table. "We have our best cryptographers working around the clock. We know this hidden drive contains the foundational logs from the weeks leading up to the software integration, but it is sealed shut. We need your help to open it." I sat down slowly, smoothing the skirt of my dress, and offered a soft, genuine smile. I reached out, gently pulling the heavy government laptop connected to the server blade toward me. A black terminal screen blinked, demanding a cryptographic key. "I gave the chief operating officer the master key on the exact day he fired me," I said calmly, looking directly into the eyes of the lead investigator. He simply chose to laugh at it. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and began to type. The room was dead silent, save for the sharp, rhythmic clicking of the plastic keys. I typed the exact phrase I had written on the back of my termination letter, "Good luck with the audit." I pressed the enter key. For a fraction of a second, the screen remained black. Then, a beautiful cascade of green text flooded the monitor. The impenetrable military-grade lock clicked open effortlessly. The federal agents practically leaped out of their chairs, crowding behind me to stare at the glowing screen. The password had never been a simple, sarcastic joke. It was the literal, functional decryption key for a highly classified evidence vault I had quietly established months ago. Inside this hidden partition was a pristine, meticulously organized digital library. It contained the original, unaltered internal memorandums. It held the direct, unencrypted email chains. Most importantly, it contained the explicit, step-by-step digital orders, personally signed by Trenton Sterling, explicitly commanding the development team to disable the legal compliance filters before launching the new software. It was the ultimate smoking gun. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the artificial intelligence did not make a mistake. The machine was weaponized by human greed. The fallout from that single decrypted folder was absolute and merciless. Trenton Sterling did not just lose his job and his reputation. He was entirely obliterated by the federal justice system, facing a mountain of irrefutable, cryptographically verified evidence. His expensive defense attorneys immediately advised him to surrender. He was formally convicted of massive public financial fraud and the egregious theft of federal subsidies. The judge did not show an ounce of leniency. Trenton was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Furthermore, the government aggressively seized every single asset tied to his name, his luxury cars, his offshore accounts, and his massive Harborview mansion were entirely liquidated to repay the stolen tax money. But the absolute sweetest part of this entire ordeal was the United States Whistleblower Act. Corporate law contains a beautiful, highly lucrative provision for individuals who expose massive fraud against the federal government. Because I had meticulously preserved the evidence, legally handed it over, and directly facilitated the successful recovery of stolen federal funds, I was entirely cleared of any technical wrongdoing. More importantly, the law dictated that I was entitled to a mandatory financial reward. The Internal Revenue Service hit the corporate entity with hundreds of millions of dollars in punitive fines and asset recoveries. My legal, non-negotiable cut of that massive recovery was exactly 15%. The story ends exactly 6 months later. I was sitting in a beautiful sunlit corner office overlooking the city. However, this office did not belong to a toxic corporation. It belonged to my own newly founded, highly exclusive cybersecurity consulting firm. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my hot caramel macchiato. My assistant walked in and placed a heavy, premium envelope on my mahogany desk. The return address belonged to the newly restructured board of directors at Aegis. They were desperately begging me to return as a highly paid independent contractor to help rebuild their shattered infrastructure. I picked up the thick corporate letter, feeling the expensive paper between my fingers. A cold, incredibly proud smirk crossed my face. Without a single second of hesitation, I dropped the letter directly into the roaring mouth of the heavy-duty paper shredder sitting next to my desk. I listened to the satisfying, mechanical hum as the last desperate plea from my former empire was sliced into thousands of meaningless strips of white confetti. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it as an ad-free channel. Your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.